Hey guys, we're back with episode 2 of the series I'm doing. Um, for now, we're still doing some beginner intro to card game, explaining how to play Legends of Runeterra. Last episode we went over some basic terminology you might hear in other people's YouTube videos. If you are new to card games, you probably wouldn't have heard many of them. We went over the types of decks like aggro and control and what those typically consist of, or their main structure. We went over some other terminologies like tempo and going wide and curve and floating mana. And today we're going to go over actual uh, Legends of Runeterra game mechanics, as in how to actually play the game from turn one. So you can use the gameplay on screen. I personally, this is just from my stream that I did during the second preview patch. So I have no clue what's happening in the games because these games were 2 months ago. But if I ever talk about something and you see something happening on screen, go ahead and use it as a reference. So the basics of like rounds. So the game consists of actions in rounds. So on screen it says round 3 at the moment. So we are in our third quote turn. And during each round, which is essentially a turn, there are actions which are like mini turns. So at the start of a round, every player gains +1 maximum mana, and each player draws a card. And it shifts the attack token between the player. So in round 1, either one or the other person starts with attack token, which is kind of like, quote, going first and going second equivalents to other card games. So right now in this video, I have the attack token. So it is my initiative to attack. Um, so once you start a round, then that quote turn begins. So round is the equivalent of a turn. And in a round, every time you play a card, it will transfer the action to the next player. So we'll see on screen he played Sparring Student, which then makes it my action, and then I can play a card, and I will play Scaled Snapper, it seems, because I actually have no clue, or maybe I'm not. Looking at a card. Well, I will play a card, probably Scaled Snapper, from what I'm looking at, probably a 2/5, or 5/2. And then it will be his action, so he gets to play another card. Or he can choose to attack. So he can either choose to attack, play a card, play a spell. If it's a burst spell, he can play another card. But that is like the only difference. So if it is your turn, you can play summon a unit, cast a spell, spend your attack token, which is what he's doing right now, to start the action phase, or pass. Those are your 4 typical options. The only difference is if you cast a spell that is burst. If you cast a spell that is burst, you can still play another card. So it's like a free card to play. It won't pass the action over. You can also, if you pass and just don't play anything, and then the other player passes, the next round begins. So that is how the round starts over. So during the combat, which is probably the most important part of a round, right now I have the attack token, and I get to choose when to initiate combat this round, which I'm doing right now. And so once combat starts, I set up my attackers, and then the action goes to him, and he can either set up blockers, and then I get to react after he sets up his blockers if I wanted to play a spell, or if I wanted to play a burst spell, a combat trick, or any of those combat action focused cards, I could. And if I played one, he would then get to react to the spell that I played. And if he played one, it would go back to me, and I would get to react to his reaction, and it would go back and forth until someone doesn't react, and then the combat will go through. So that is how the attack turns go. It's very confusing. Without ever playing. Once you get to playing, it will become much more understandable. But just from verbal explanation, it's a little rough. So it may sound very complicated. It's not as complicated as it sounds. I may not be doing it justice, but the game consists of going back and forth. So he just started his attack, and I get to choose blockers. So I will set up some blockers, because I would be stupid not to here, because I will lose. So I will set up some blockers or play a spell. And if I set up my blockers, and if you hover, that's a good thing. If you hover over that, you get to see the outcome of the combat. So that is a good thing to help you to see the outcome of the battle before the battle even starts. So I will set up my blockers, because I'm going to be at -5 if I take all this. We'll see what I do here, because this will be a good chance to explain, because I would most likely play a spell. And then I set up my blockers and play spells, and the combat does not go through immediately. He gets his reaction to my reaction. So he can choose to play spells right now if he wants to. But if he doesn't, then it will just continue. And yes, he's reacting to my reaction, which is going to kill my karma. And then since I didn't react to that, the combat then begins. And that is how the action phase plays out. So that is, it may seem pretty difficult, and in the higher stages of the game, there's going to be a lot of going back and forth. But that is the basics of turn order in the game. And there's many, many different cards which can be activated within the combat phase. Burst spells and fast spells. Every single one of those can be cast during combat. Slow spells cannot be cast during combat. Slow spells have to be cast during your action. So if someone sets up attackers and you wanted to play a card called Avalanche, which is a 4-mana slow spell, deal 2 damage to everything, you would not be able to, because he has initiated combat and you cannot cast slow spells during combat. You can cast any fast spell during combat, you can cast any burst spell during combat, and burst spells do not change the action over. So you can play technically up to 10 burst spells if you wanted, or even more. Any burst spells you have, you can play it and he won't get a chance to react to it. But after you play those spells, then he will get a turn to react. He cannot straight deny or chain, if you're familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! At all, his spell cards to yours if they are burst spells. So there's a lot of different combat action focused stuff in the rounds, but during a round, if you're not in the combat phase, it is literally I play a card, then you play a card, then I play a card, then you play a card, most of the time. Like 99% of the time. The only part of the rounds that get confusing for a lot of people is the action phase. But once you get to playing the game, it becomes a lot more simple to understand. It's very intuitive. It's just hard to explain verbally. So it's a blessing that I have this video from my past live stream. So that is going to conclude how rounds go. And it will go all the way up to 10 mana. And then after you're at 10 mana, you will never gain mana again. You can only store spell mana, and I guess we'll go over spell mana as well. So this bar below my mana on the right side of the screen that says 0 and has 3 notches on it, same thing for my enemy. Any access mana, like now, will be stored into the spell mana slot. And so now I have 3 mana and 1 spell mana. So technically, I can play a 4-mana spell on turn 3 because I have 1 stored mana, which was access mana from a last turn. And it will always use spell mana before your normal mana for casting a spell. So if you have 4 normal mana and 3 spell mana, and you wanted to cast a 3-cost spell, it will always use the spell mana first. So spell mana is literally just access mana from previous turns being stored for later, but only for spells. It's really simple. It's just saving mana for spells. That's literally it. And beyond that, I think that concludes on the very basics of getting into the mechanics and how to go back and forth in Legends of Runeterra. There are many. I could go on for an hour talking about the intricacies of, do you attack as soon as possible? Do you, cast a burst and pat? There's a lot of intricate turn-based things for high-level play, which I'm not going to go over, because that would just be an hour-long video, and no one wants to watch that. But this is a very basic understanding, so hopefully after watching this video, you now are capable of just jumping in and getting to play, and understanding the different kind of decks you can run from my last video. But I think the next video is going to have to be how to get a deck, find a deck that you would like to play, or build a deck yourself. So I think we will do that next video, in building a deck around archetypes, around from the first video that we went over. And that is what a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people struggle with coming up with their own deck, or trying to make it work and messing around with the curve and knowing what cards are good. A lot of that just comes with experience. So if you've never played a card game before, it's just really hard to know what card is good. Because you can read a card and read a different card, and one card may be super good and one card may be super bad, and you won't have a firm grasp on it. So yeah, we'll go over those in the next video, more than likely, how to build a deck. And then we'll start getting into more advanced gameplay mechanics that can help you while playing Legends of Runeterra in the future. Thank you for watching. Please leave a like and comment if you have any questions, if you have any recommendations or criticism. Don't feel bad about telling me I'm ass. And we'll talk to you guys later.
The look in your eyes is like a glitter ball. The feel of your skin is like a liquid gold. Don't you know that you're a miracle? Oh. And I will love you come rain or shine.